Hey, welcome back, everyone. Today we are here with Aaron Burke. So Aaron and I are going to keep doing a weekly thing. We're going to go back and forth between our channels. And we were going to do like a quick fire Q&A about some commonly asked questions in bodybuilding. And first we were going to go over where Aaron stands with prep. So I've recently taken over Aaron's coaching, and we are in the process of getting him a pro card. What's going on, Aaron? How you doing?
I'm doing very, very well, mate. Yeah, and again, I appreciate you jumping on board with a little short notice, but we've had some good conversations about this, and we're pretty confident we can get the job done right. And it's also about building like a really good sort of long-term partnership that I sort of feel confident in, and I think we click pretty well. So I'm excited to see how things progress.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, everything's going really good. I mean, do you want me to give a little bit of a rundown?
Sure. Yeah, why don't you tell everyone how far you're out?
Because I mean, we've been going for only about a week now, really, since being back, recovered from the Vegas trip, recovered from Olympia plague and all of that. And now it's just a case of we reset macros, reset some dosages, things like that. We'll go into all the finer details, but basically had a nice high day. That high day brought me back to life. Holy moly. I have not been that full and had pumps like that in a long time. So that really felt good. The next day was just like a little tad spilled, as to be expected, which was great. And then following that was a rest day, and that pulled off the spill straight away. So the next day I woke up like, oh, actually things are starting to move along again. And then followed up by a couple of moderate days, which just gradually they look better as the week progressed. Training feels amazing. Pumps are great, strong as an ox. Everything, all the input, the new input as far as the performance enhancers are concerned, everything feels great. Sleep is great. Recovery is solid. So it's all green lights and ticking boxes right now, man. It feels really good. Had a rest day yesterday. Woke up this morning. Looks pretty damn good. I thought that the morning fasted look was still pretty decent, and there's a fair bit of fullness still there. And then today, post-workout in the mirror at the gym, holy shit, I really like that look. That looked pretty cool. I just posted a real quick reel. I don't think I've sent you pictures of that yet. I just posted a quick reel, and you can have a look at that. I'll send it to you on WhatsApp now, just real quick. But it looks good. I was very, very happy with that. And that was after just 150-gram of carb meal in the morning, and then pre-workout meal is on moderate day was 75 grams, and then the intra workout, which has 25 grams of the carb powder in there. So that's what, a total of 150 grams.
Yep. And
even just that amount just dialed in really, really well. It just felt really good.
Yeah. For a guy your size, you don't seem to need a ton of food. Your body kind of soaks up whatever we give it, right? I think I mean, the conditioning seems to be, a little more of a challenge, right? That's kind of where you fell a little short in previous, right? It was never a size issue. You're massive.
No, it doesn't seem to be a size issue. It's just really dialing it in and looking gnarly and crispy and stuff. So, but I think the way that my body seems to be responding and feeling right now, I think that's nicely on track. I think over the next, because it's only been literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days, and already seeing a lot of positives in how I'm feeling and how I'm responding. And, I think over the next week or two, that will just continue to get better and better. And I think we'll be in shooting distance pretty soon, which is nice to see. So, overall, prep-wise so far going really well. I think it's probably a little bit too early. Like I said, we're only 6 days into it. So probably best to give it a little bit of time to do some proper check-in reports and things like that. We'll let things settle in but yeah, overall great, mate. I just sent you the video on WhatsApp, but yeah, I was even just after 150 grams of carbs over the 2 meals in the intra, I was feeling pretty damn good about it. So I definitely look good with a good pump right now. That's for sure.
When I met you in Vegas, you were on super low carb, right? Outside of like some cheat meals
that was
we had together. So
yeah, we were doing basically breakfast. But no, we were training fasted, I think, or on very, very little food, having a breakfast, some sort of breakfast place food, for post-workout. And then pretty much nothing all day apart from energy drinks and coffee. And then an evening meal with the crew, you know, and that was about it. So, yeah, it was low food, but I mean, even then, it still looked reasonably decent, I thought. So, you know,
Yeah, no, I thought, no, you have a great look. I think it was just the food was just off, right? And then I don't think anything I did was drastic. It was just a slight tweak for now, right? We can keep playing with it as, you know.
Yeah, I think the main thing is you've worked with a bunch of, you know, bigger guys, so you kind of have a better understanding of requirements and what can bring a physique back to life and what can bring a physique out of a plateau or a stalling point, right? And I think you have to have that, because I'm sure you would agree, like we mentioned last time, with super heavyweights, it's just a bit of a different story. There's just a lot more things to consider with the body weight there, I think. Well, at least with me. So,
you have a lot more glycogen, you have a lot more of everything going on, right?
Yeah.
And it's generally not food. I noticed with most guys your size, at least for prep, generally the food's almost lower than the smaller guys like myself that almost need to eat a ton going into a show.
Yeah.
You guys can tend to
tolerate. I can definitely dig down
food,
for sure.
Because you definitely don't flatten
But
out.
you know, and that's even easier now. Like today's a moderate day, and it felt great having a little bit of those carbs before the training, and then a little post-workout meal to kind of replenish. But then for the rest of the day, I don't really have I'm microdosing the tirzepatide, right? And that kind of just takes away the hunger side of things. Like I'm not food focused whatsoever. Like, I could fast, no problem right now, because it just takes away, but I can still eat. So that microdose in these GLPs, I think, is a key thing there. And yeah, it allows you to eat. It doesn't kill off the appetite that much that you can't eat. You can eat, but you're not food focused. And I think that's quite a nice tool to play with. So
yeah,
that's making life
your
very
appetite
easy. Yeah.
Sorry.
And I think if you're like in a position where you're like, okay, Aaron, we need to dig real hard, tools like that are going to allow that to happen a lot easier. And
yeah, but we also don't want to lose your appetite entirely, because that's not going to be good for you either.
Not beneficial. No.
So with the
but yeah, so far so good.
With the Q&A stuff, the first thing was kind of talk about insulin, right? Is it a game changer or not? What's your opinion about insulin?
My opinion what I tell clients, because this is basically a question I get from a lot of clients. It's like, you know, I see a lot of people talk about insulin. Is this the game changer? Is this going to be the thing that really levels me up? And I'm like, no, but there will come a point that a lot of people, a lot of it's genetic, I think, but especially size wise, when you do have enough muscle and you do have certain food requirements, there'll be a time where you just need to shuttle a bit more food a little bit more faster and a bit more efficiently. And that could be at any stage, genetically speaking, depends on the person. So what I have people doing typically is say, look, measure your blood glucose right before every meal throughout the day. Have 2 or 3 hours between meals, measure your blood glucose right before your meals. And I'll look at how that blood sugar trends throughout the day. Are there certain points in the day where it tends to trend a little bit high and we might need to put something in place there to help bring it back down? Then sure. But then is insulin really the first point of call there to do that? Probably not. You know, I might play a little berberine or something like that. You know, I might be looking, and this is assuming we've looked at fasted insulin levels, HbA1c, and all of that is good. I'm talking more real-time blood glucose readings. And then it's just going to come to a point where, like for myself, for an example, really, like I don't need to eat a lot of food to grow, but I have pushed the food to see what happens. And it gets to a point where, you know, I would like to regulate that blood sugar a little bit quicker, a little bit more efficiently. And it does boost appetite a lot. So for people that can eat a lot or don't have big appetites for the, you know, some people can put away 7,000 plus calories, no problem. For me, that is very difficult. For you, Paul, you know, and Amy, you smash that no problem, probably. So for me, insulin is great for being able to shuttle that food a bit more efficiently, as long as it is going in the right places. And it does boost my appetite a little bit. So that would be a kind of a scenario I would use it. But for most people, I don't, to be honest. I think for most people with general diet control, you can continue growing really, really efficiently without ever really needing insulin, to be honest.
Correct.
And yeah, so it's one of those things, like, play it if you need it, but it isn't going to be that game changer thing that you put it in and all of a sudden you're just going to start growing more. You don't need to. I think if you program diets well enough, most of my guys are very, very insulin sensitive throughout the day, and they don't need anything. Maybe a sprinkle of berberine here and there. Maybe people that have been obese and had insulin resistant in the past might benefit from something like a metformin to try and bring something back to life from the cell sensitivity side of things. But insulin is a bit of a last resort for me.
Yeah, I said the same. I think the three things are, right, genetics first, how much muscle mass you have, like you said, and how much food. Like you said, I've never, it's not something I've ever needed. No matter how much I eat, my blood sugar doesn't really go out of the 80s fasted. It just depends. A lot of it has to do with how lean you stay, right? I noticed a lot of guys, as they get heavier and heavier in the off season, they have to push the insulin more and more. But as you get them closer to this stage, a lot of times you have to pull the insulin out because they'll go hypo. So, and there's also a risk with insulin, right? It's one of the few things that bodybuilders do on a routine basis that could actually kill you if you make a mistake with it. So there is an inherent risk. And do I think it's a game changer? For most people, no, nor do I think most people would ever even need it. I think most guys, if they focused on cleaning up their diet and things like that and staying leaner all year round, they probably would never need it. Now, guys at the pro level and open, there's a very good chance a lot of them need that. But again, you're talking about guys that are, 280 to 300 pounds that are eating a ton of food. It's more of in relation to how much you need to consume and what you need to do with that food versus just prophylactically just using insulin, assuming that it's going to be wildly anabolic. And that's not really what we see. The next one was Incr. This is kind of an interesting one. So I just was going to clear this up. So a lot of guys screw around with LR3, which in my opinion is junk. Doesn't seem to do much. Most guys don't ever finish it.
Something like IGF, does something a bit faster.
Yeah, pretty much the same kind of thing, right? The results are just
not growth. You're probably
so
right.
All the research shows basically most guys are better off running GH and pushing the growth hormone at a much higher level and not even using something like Incr. We'll get to the benefits of possibly Incr in a second. I think what people need to understand, and I'll explain this in 3 scenarios. When you use if you use a test booster, right, your limit on how much test you'll produce is still your testicles, right? But if you use testosterone, you've bypassed the testicles, so you can take the level to a higher amount. If you use berberine, metformin, right, the rate limit is still what your body can produce versus adding insulin there, which you can obviously bypass the pancreas at that point. And same with something like growth hormone, right? So if you take, MK677, the rate limit still is going to be your pituitary gland. It's just forcing the pituitary to push out more, but your pituitary will still limit the amount versus real growth hormone, right? You're bypassing the pituitary. Where that varies with IGF is the IGF that's produced in response to growth hormone, you're still limited by your liver, right? Yeah. So your liver is going to be the limiting factor in that. When you take actual IGF, real IGF Incr, you've now bypassed the liver part of it and you've now forced a different level. And that's where some of the risks come in. So that's where huge amounts of Incr can cause organ growth and other sorts of things that are just not desirable, versus the odds of you getting your IGF high enough from GH is most likely never going to occur, right? We don't see that in HIV with 6 milligrams a day or 18 units. That's just not occurring. But with IGF, the medical dose is very low. It's 250 micrograms, or bodybuilders typically are taking 1 to 2 milligrams, right? So it's a much larger dose. So there are risks with that. And I would say, again, similar to insulin, for the average guy, I don't think it's going to make or break anything. I think if you've gotten to, your size or bigger, right, and you're competing with the best in the world, I think will make a difference, sure. But they've also maximized everything else, right? They've pulled all the other levers. That's a time to leverage something like an Incr, where I think a guy that's 180 pounds that's using 300 milligrams of testosterone, and has a very short, he's a very short history using this kind of stuff. He's never really leveraged more than, a couple units of growth hormone, most likely generic. He's not ever pushed anything hard enough. He's not eating enough food. Adding something like, Incrlux in there, if he can even find it or afford it, is probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? It's not something that's like mass market. It's very rarely prescribed. It's only in children that their liver doesn't respond to growth hormone. So then Incrlux is used. So it's not like growth hormone that has various uses and it's more common to find on the black market. You really don't see a ton of Incrlux just floating around.
No, it's very hard to get.
Yeah.
It's, and like you said, it's one of them. If you're not really maxing things out and having to do, if we're not like, I'm talking cherry on top of the cake to bring up some lagging body parts when you've been doing this for a significant amount of time and you've already built a pretty significant amount of muscle, and you're kind of teetering on maxing out a lot of things, or you've utilized most things already. You've leveraged your tools, and we're looking for the little added extras. I think in those scenarios, it can be very beneficial, especially for bringing up specific lagging body parts. But if, like you said, if you're trying to play those cards too early and you still have essentially way more bang for buck cards to still be played, I mean, why don't you just play those first, right? Why don't you just bump the test up a little bit? Why don't we add some more anabolics in? Why don't we pump a little bit more growth hormone? Things that are a bit, not only just easier to get, more reliable, but you can use them sustainably and consistently for longer. Like Incrlex, you might be lucky to come across a box or two every now and then, but then it's gone again. So it's not even really, for most people, a very sustainable option. No. And yeah, so it's one of them. Like if it comes along every now and then, and it's like, oh, you know, I can maybe run this for sort of, you know, 6-7 weeks or something like that. It's all I can get my hands on, and you can afford it, and you're in a position in your physique where you might benefit a few percent, then why not? You know, at this level, for me, I'll take every few percent I can get my hands on.
But that's going to make or break your career for a guy half your size.
Right, of course.
Doesn't matter.
But that 2 or 3% for me might make a difference. But 2 or 3% for a guy who still has 60% of growing to do from other things,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't really. It's not the time.
Well, and I think part of the problem is with the internet, right? Like what we do on social media. I think in a lot of ways it's enhanced people's experiences with anabolics, right? Because now it's okay to talk about these things publicly, where it wasn't for a long time. And on the same hand, I also think it's destroyed a lot of things, right? I think that people have a lot of knowledge at their fingertips, but they just don't know what to do with that. And they don't know what, like, I'll sum it up by basically saying, if you think you're advanced, most likely you're not, right? The advanced guys like yourself generally question themselves versus the guys who are somewhere in the middle, been doing random cycles for a couple of years, most likely don't need advanced stuff to get to the next level. And you see this in their usage, right? I think there's a really weird missing segment in the market right now. You see a ton of TRT and TRT enhanced, right? Guys that are actually afraid of using an appropriate amount of testosterone for growth, right? Because doctors have scared people. So they're using, you know, 100 milligrams to 200 and something milligrams, right? They've never gone higher than that. They want to add an anabolic to that, which in my mind is not the correct strategy in the beginning. I would titrate test up, and I would continue just to leverage test until you basically have run out of possibilities with testosterone, right? Which generally is over a gram at some point. I think you got years of just using something like that. And then you can look at adding something else. That always made more sense to me, right? And then you have then the intermediate stage where you introduce one anabolic, right? Like let's say nandrolone, for instance. So you do test and DECA, right? That segment of the market seems to be gone. I don't see a lot of guys in the middle. Then you get, you know, the more advanced guys like yourself, but there's that weird part that's really missing. That's odd, because that used to make up like 85 to 90% of the guys in the bodybuilding community. And I don't necessarily mean guys competing. I just mean in our world, right? That was the majority of guys were intermediate guys, you know, between, 190 and 230, somewhere in that build, that didn't quite need Incrlux or huge amounts of GH. And then, right. And then we just see the advanced guys. And then we also see a lot of newer guys that think that they're advanced and they need to leverage things. And this is one of the reasons why I'm clarifying, because people hang a lot of times I'll make a statement or I'll describe something that's used. And then a lot of guys that will then try to mimic that, right, when they don't need it. And Incrlux is a good example of that. But even with, using Tren in the off season, Tren is a great anabolic. If it didn't work, it wouldn't be given to cattle, right? They'd be used Primo instead of Primo was a better anabolic. And unfortunately it's not. It's just the Primo might be safer perhaps, right? but guys now, because I talked about trenananadrol, now guys who would normally fit into that intermediate range, right, that should be using test and EQ or test and nandrolone or test and primo, are now trying to float up to the test trenanadrol thing again when they weigh 180 pounds. That doesn't make any sense to me either, right? Or leveraging, 10 units of growth when they're in that same size category. It's like, it's not an appropriate amount of things to be using at that stage in your development, right? There's a reason why it takes time and you progress through it. You don't go full force out of the gate.
So but a lot of people are. It's just a patience thing, and it's a time and patience thing. Some people just, like, I have a lot of guys that will come and they've been doing things for years, all kinds of crazy cycles. And I'm like, okay, let's have a look at your training. And it's like, okay, your diet, your training sucks. And it's like, so it doesn't matter what you're doing. The foundations are not in place. You ain't getting good results. And that's clearly the case in a lot of these cases. Minimal results, loads of side effects. I'm in a couple of groups where there are hundreds of guys that have very entry level to intermediate kind of physiques. Not really anyone there beyond that. Yet they are experimenting with everything and anything. All kinds of random concoctions and cocktails. Now, I'm all for experimentation in controlled environments. Mm-hmm. But like I keep saying before, you don't play bodybuilding. You don't play with this stuff. And like you said, if you were just to sort of leverage your test titrations over time, have a bit of patience, give yourself a good few years to just leverage that and maybe a bit of growth hormone alongside it, you're going to get really great results and you're going to have a lot less to manage. But there's always, I understand and I sympathize, there's always, with so much talk, with so much information in the industry, like you mentioned, there's like, okay, well, what else can we just add in? What can we sprinkle on the side here? What can we put in? And it's like, okay, look, this is potentially how we could be doing this. But understand that realistically, it's just, you're not going to, adding this in isn't going to give you the results that you have in your head unless you are just a ridiculous genetic responder to everything.
Less than 1%.
Most people aren't, yeah. And then they're like, oh, it didn't really make much of a difference. And it's like, yeah, because it's just time. Time is the one thing that, you can't make up for in milligrams, unfortunately. And you're just going to end up throwing different things, hitting different receptor sites, different pathways too quickly when you don't have enough muscle. And you can't really leverage that testosterone anywhere up near a gram in a short period of time. You just don't have the muscle. You're just going to aromatase way too aggressively, and you're going to be battling side effects. So yeah, sure, you might only be at sort of 300-400 megs of testosterone, but that's more than enough to grow for a long period of time if you have the patience
and the genetics.
But
that's
and the genetics.
I use 300 milligrams as kind of a barometer for genetics and response, right? So if you take a guy who's new at cycling and you put him on 300 milligrams of test, let's say 150 twice a week. I don't get fancy with the microdosing and stuff. I think the daily dosing, unless you're a very high aromatizer or you're using grams of gear where it's required that you're using daily injections in order to get the volume in, I'm a fan of just sticking with the way the ester was designed. Just inject it twice a week. With testosterone, with cypionate or nanthate or any of the longer things. I would say if a guy's not growing significantly on 300 milligrams, bodybuilding is probably not in his future, right? Because
I just made a video on this.
Fairly dramatic change, 15-ish pounds on, depending on your size, in 8-9 weeks on 300 milligrams of test. If that's not the occurrence and you've only gained a pound or two, assuming that other things like food and training are okay, probably not in your future to become a pro bodybuilder, right? You see that every time.
I literally made a video saying exactly this yesterday. I was like, a good genetics that probably have realistic bodybuilding career potential. Your first exposure within 4 to 8 weeks, you are going to go, yep, you're a responder.
And I'm by no means gifted at this. I think I put on 17 pounds the first time I used testosterone at 300 milligrams.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and so if you're not getting something like out of it, then it's...
I completely recomped. I completely transformed in 12 weeks. I jumped straight into a prep with me and Steve. Started out at 300 megs for my first cycle. 12 weeks later, I was on stage. I was a different human being.
Yeah.
We played a few cards, a few tools at the end of the prep, but it was a very, very clear response very early on. So
that's what we're looking for.
It's one of those things. But it's the patience. People just, it's so accessible now. It's so easy to get your hands on stuff. And, you know, and I understand people want to, you know, experiment a bit, but, you know, what can you do? All we can do is advise. Simple as that, isn't it?
Right. And if people knew, I mean, we don't need to talk about your dosing stuff. That's no one's business, but you use a ton less than most people would think because you just don't need it, because you respond well to, right? You could also probably tolerate higher amounts of things, but your total usage,
Exactly.
you know, I was shocked when I met you. It's just
pushed things higher before.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we're not going to talk about numbers.
It's all good.
But, you know, same with Samson. I mean, you know, I'm not going to talk about his cycle anymore because that's a big deal on the internet, but like he's using a ton less than a lot of amateur guys who never even make it to stage are using, right? He's Mr. Olympia. That's not to say there aren't pros that use a ton, because there's lots of pros that use a ton of gear as well, but it's not necessarily needed depending on where your genetics are. I think the next thing kind of
segues us into like the last thing then. Oh, sorry, no, it doesn't. There's one before that. The Megadosing orals.
Oh, Megadosing orals. Sorry.
Megadosing orals in a peak week scenario. So I've heard various different protocols and scenarios for peak weeks, and Megadosing Winstrol, Megadosing Halo, all kinds of things like that. I'm actually a bit of a fan of Winnie, but the Megadosing thing, I think, is...
Where do you find
I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't really have the answers. It's things like, I think trial and error goes a long way in the right scenario with the right people. And it's kind of one of them. But is there like set in stone things that people do as far as megadosing? No, I've had people just run completely normal entry level low dosages straight into the stage. And then some people, you ramp it up a little bit depending on what their response is like. And I think everything is on the table there, I think, to be honest. But I don't know if you have any thoughts, personal preferences, things you've seen in the past that have worked in certain scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I've come over the years, I've kind of come to, like, you know, outside of some rare exceptions, basically a happy place where I think Winstrol is the one to use. I would say Anavar. I think Anavar is a fantastic drug. I don't think it has a ton of place in the end of a prep unless you've pulled test, right? Like, it's not going to do anything that testosterone's not going to do. Assuming you're, you know, for a bigger guy like you that might run test into a show, it's not going to do anything that the test isn't already doing. It's not going to do anything Trent isn't already doing. I find that just kind of almost like just organ burden for no reason at that point. Halo testing, while it's been used in the past, it's something that I would stay away from it unless the guy really needs it. I think that there's a lot of mental side effects that go with that drug.
Yeah, I think it's just like you said, if you're pulling things out and the training starts to suffer and you're really dragging, then things like the Anavar and the Halo, Superdrol probably come into play there. But I think purely from a cosmetic point of view, Winnie is king.
Yeah. So generally for most guys, it would just be Winnie, right? And I'll generally titrate it up over the last 4 weeks. I would use it very acutely at the end. I'm not like, I don't know if it's 6 to 8 weeks. They seem to, most of those orals seem to tucker out. You basically get the max response after about 4 weeks anyway. After that, you're just causing organ stress. In my mind, I don't see any like progression of response after 4 weeks. So I typically would run it 4 weeks, titrate up depending on the guy, right? Sometimes you don't have to titrate up, depends on their look, right? Because again, that's what you're chasing is a look. The judges don't know what you weigh. They just care what they see. So, you know, whether you stay 4 weeks or you bring it up, that really depends. But that seems to kind of, Winstrol to me defines the look of bodybuilding on the stage. It's that rock hard, dry, striated granite look more than anything else, right? I think Mastron contributes to a degree. I think Trembolone contributes to a degree, but I think that really grainy look is Winstrol. You know, and that would really be the only oral that I would.
As long as you're lean enough.
Yeah, I mean, Superdrol, I mean, can work. If a guy's gotten really flat, you could use Superdrol or even Anadrol. I mean, that's been tried and true. Very rarely. I would rather have a guy use Pharma Growth and keep some level in to keep the fullness there, right? As long as there's not water retention, that's why I generally reduce it to a more manageable dose, you know, just to keep that fullness and that look in there, you know, or a guy that's bigger that needs the massive size, then you keep the test in. Smaller guys, classic guys, generally I'll yank the test out because the dry look generally contributes. And also they have a serious weight cap they got to meet, right? It's very hard to make the classic weight cap at a certain point. So like pulling test kind of aids in that because you can usually lose a couple pounds there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think
that's where I might play a little
anything.
bit of Halo or something in those scenarios with smaller guys.
Yeah, or that's when Anavar can come in when you know, smaller guy.
I think, yeah, for sure.
What about so non-genomic versus you want me to talk about the synergy between the two? And explain
of any particular, so let's say that sort of takes us back to that before. Let's paint a bit of a picture here for someone who is a genetic responder, does have good genetics, can run whatever and be absolutely fine with it. And they're looking to build into, let's just say we're sort of second stage, third stage of building into a cycle. We're adding secondary, we're adding anabolics, we're adding secondaries potentially. So we already have our base in. I think we have different terminology for what you would consider it. So you have test-based, for instance, and then we're adding in a secondary there, and then maybe something on top of that. So in your opinion, the best non-genomic synergies between certain compounds?
Different things. So, so people can understand what we're talking about. So you have androgen receptors located in 3 places in the cell. So you have the classic androgen receptor, which is considered genomic, and by genomic meaning you're basically making DNA. So it deals with genes, and that's the primary thing that we're looking for with muscle growth is the classic AR. You then have a subcellular androgen receptor that doesn't ever go to the cell surface, nor does it ever go to the nucleus. And that Winstrol and danazol are the only 2 drugs that interact with that. Danazol is not a steroid that anyone that I know would ever take because it's not anabolic, but it's used in labs as a test for that AR. And then you have the cell surface membrane androgen receptor that is the same structure as the classic one, except for some reason it's bound to the cell surface. We don't know why it doesn't move in, and that's what causes non-genomic responses. So that is strength through nerve stimulation through calcium ion channels, right? So that's the halo, anadrol, that initial burst of strength way before tissue could be accrued. That's non-genomic, right? You also see that on, like some of the mood changes and things like that are done through non-genomic responses. But basically the only drugs that only deal with that one and don't deal with the classic AR are dianabol and anadrol. It's possibly that oral T-ball does as well, but I don't know. I honestly have no idea. Since it's a modified form of dianabol, it's possible that it functions the same way, but I would consider that basically a beginner drug that doesn't have a lot of place in bodybuilding because it doesn't build a ton of tissue. Anavar would be a better drug than T-ball. So you basically what you're looking at. So when you look at cycle design, right, for a beginner or an intermediate, you're basically leveraging, right, test as a base and you're, an anabolic, right? And most anabolics, nandrolone, equipoise, primo, masteron, I'll include in there, even though I don't consider that a great anabolic. They're really just dealing with the AR as well as tests. They're not really even doing as much as test. Test would have mixed activity. It hits what doesn't do the subcellular one, but it hits the cell surface and it hits the classic one, and it hits other receptors in the body. So test is considered like a mixed response thing. Basically, so it's like primo and nandrolone, DECA, are great at what they do, right? They hit the androgen receptor. They don't really do a ton outside of that anabolically, so that's why they would really fall short of what testosterone does. That's why at the beginning I said the smartest thing to do is just titrate test up. You're going to get more growth milligram per milligram on testosterone than you are out of something like nandrolone or primo, right? So nandrolone, you get some aldosterone increase through the water that looks like tissue, but it's not necessarily any more tissue than you're getting on test. But it's an intermediate or beginning cycle. You're generally mixing, 2 basically class 1 drugs together, and you're just getting additive milligrams, right? So 500 milligrams of this and 400 milligrams of that literally just yields 900 milligrams. When you combine anadrol or dianabol, although dianabol is generally not preferred for most guys, you get a synergistic effect. The stronger the primary anabolic binds to the androgen receptor, trenbolone, the stronger the response you're going to be. So like just a rough example, this is not an actual dose, but if you used 50 milligrams of trenbolone or 50 milligrams of anadrol, or you used 50 milligrams if you used 100 milligrams of tren and 100 milligrams of anadrol, or use 50 milligrams of both together, you would get 1 + 1 = 3 when you combine them versus 1 + 1 = 2 with either of the other ones, right? And that's why you would get synergy out of something like Trenbolone and Anadrol. And even Dan Duchaine, before he understood the science of this stuff in the 80s, he said something along the lines, there's no better cycle for mass than Test, Tren, and Anadrol. And he was actually right. The problem is those cycles are not necessarily used or leveraged at the newer level, right? You just don't need that. That's why you can get away with something like Test and Primo, and possibly to something like Test and Primo forever, depending on where you want to take your physique, right? Unless you're really pursuing to be 280 pounds, you might not ever need to get to that point. And kind of when you get to the point you've maxed out your genetics, that's when those things come into play, right? You're past what your natural DNA is going to yield as far as muscle growth. That's, I think, when it's time to start leveraging those synergies. That's when it's time to bring the growth hormone up. That's when it's time maybe Incrlux comes into play, right? That's the way I would look at those things. It's not necessary to be used by newer guys. But even in the 80s, the late 70s and 80s, they stumbled upon this stuff without even knowing what they were doing, right? They used D-bol, which they were probably using for estrogen, and they were leveraging Primo and Deca, and maybe some Proviron for some DHT, but they would grow much bigger because the D-bol was synergistic with the Primo and the Nandrolone.
Yeah.
Right. And they didn't even know why that was occurring, but they just noticed when they added that to it, they just grew much more.
Yeah. That's why all their answers are the same. Oh, just a little bit of this and a bit of that. We don't know why. It's just what we had.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was just synergistic combinations.
Yeah. And that was all that was available. So that's what they used.
Yeah.
Right. It was whatever. There were like 3 doctors in LA that were writing prescriptions for this stuff, and it's whatever they could get their hands on. It wasn't like today where you could just order stuff online and have anything at your fingertips immediately. But that's kind of the stance on non-genomic versus genomic. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think you pretty much you covered that very, very well. You're getting really good at explaining this stuff, man. No wonder your channel's blowing up.
Fortunately, I've done it a bunch of times, so you get.
But it's good because there's the audience is growing massively, but it's also the level of the audience's understanding varies so much now, right? Before you were probably only talking in circles where it's a very high level of understanding, but now more and more people are being drawn to our channels, and the message is really getting across. People are really enjoying it. So, I just want to say to everyone that's been watching and asking for more, like, thanks for supporting, thanks for watching, everyone, and obviously Kurt and Paul, I highly recommend you do their anabolic e-course because it really covers a lot of this stuff in depth. And I like the way you guys have presented that as well. More of just like conversations like this, rather than being a very sort of formal, this bullet point presentation. It's more of it's like an e-course / podcast in a very well put together order where everything's explained with some real world scenarios, what's really applicable in the real world, and it just makes it way more interesting to learn that way, in my opinion. It's a really, really cool course. You guys have done a great job on that. So I highly recommend everyone go and check that out. You've also got the growth hormone ebook, which I've almost finished. I've been reading that in my before I fall asleep at night, but I fall asleep pretty quick these days.
And it's probably a snoozer too. It's probably not a book you want to read when you're tired.
Yeah, but it is good. It's very, very informative. It's definitely the best growth hormone book out there. So really, really good stuff, mate. And let's continue to keep doing these. And I think as prep progresses, we can give people a bit more of an insight into things we're doing, changes that are happening and making, and we can kind of walk people through those changes and why they're being made, and what kind of responses we're looking for from different things, and give people a bit of an insight into that journey as well.
I have a guy named Logan that's competing this weekend. It'll be his first show.
Yeah, I was chatting with him earlier. He looks awesome.
What he wants to kind of broaden his social media presence. And I said, when you're done with your show, he should come on. We should talk about his prep, how it went, because his prep actually went incredibly smoothly, especially for first prep. And he's very exact. Like if I tell him to do something, he executes 100%. He's not someone I ever worry about what he's actually doing. And it would probably be cool. Maybe the 3 of us could do it, because I would be interested.
Yeah,
to see
get him on.
Questions that you
get him on. I love doing prep reviews. especially for first timers as well, because it's such a new experience for them. And it's a really nice, it's usually a really good story to hear from people. Yeah. So yeah, definitely organize that.
We'll do that.
He looks great.
Yeah, he does really look good. He really worked hard for this. What where can everyone find you?
Instagram, Bodybuilding with Aaron, everywhere.
Okay. I will link all your
just type in Bodybuilding with Aaron, you'll find it on YouTube, Instagram, all of that. And
Aaron is you're a coach as well. So I'm sure you're taking clients.
Try to be.
And you're moving to the US.
I am, all sealed and done and signed and ready to go, man. So I'm going to get the show done at the end of November, and then basically pack my bags, get out of Dodge, and come and get to America. Can't wait.
Yeah, it'll be
really level up, bump the career up. It's just very exciting times ahead, and I'll swing through your neck of the woods and come and visit as well.
Yeah, and I just ask that people support Aaron in his new adventures in the United States and his journey to become a pro, because I think he's going to go very far. This is the time to grab him now before he gets massive, massively popular, beside massive in physical size.
No,
cool, man.
We'll keep doing this, mate. I'd like to keep it, like you and the crew, the people in our circle. None of this stuff happens without all of you guys. So I keep my circle small. I keep them tight. So I won't be going anywhere. As we climb through the ranks, just gives me more opportunity to share the journey with the people that matter, right? So it's really cool, and I love the interactions, the people that are following along and supporting. I appreciate all of you. It's just awesome. This year has been incredible, and it's just going to get better.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, man. We will. So next week we'll do another one of these. We'll do it on your channel, and we'll keep going back and forth. You guys can comment below if there's anything specific you want us to talk about, and we will address that stuff. Thank you very much. Take care.
Awesome. See you in the next one, dude.